Good morning, sir.
By the inevitable and inimitable Curt Doolittle. We
Well,
meet again.
we do our weekly thing, and I'm thinking imitable. I don't think it's good to imitate me. You know,
You don't want to. I just like practicing my English words, sir.
yes,
What was interesting, we were doing work yesterday. The boys were looking for translation of Latin from order to chaos. And it was kind of entertaining because I went on the Google Translator and was doing the same thing I do with the Hebrew thing. And so it's not the same. It's similar though. It's like, so I'm like, take the English and then I turn it into Latin and then I bounce it back and forth. So you take what it said was the Latin and turn it into
correct.
say what it thinks the English is translated from that and
Yep.
do that several times. And you end up with some stable equilibrium of meaning. And
Yes.
it was quite interesting because it ended up equating virtue, power with magnitude generates order.
Virtue with power. Oh, that's really good.
Very interesting.
Good.
So, like I say, it's all silliness to me, and I enjoyed the opportunity to apply my silliness in different patterns.
It's just interesting how the state of it is. Like I can sort of think in Russian, so that's not too hard. Although there's not real equivalent sometimes. It's really weird because you wouldn't think it would work in China and Chinese, but it turns out to be really good in English, Chinese English, which
Huh.
is really weird. But uh, any of the Arabic or even Persian's okay, but the Arabic language, for fucking get it, you can't. It just doesn't translate, and I have no idea why. Because you'd think it
Huh.
would, but the concepts are so different.
Huh.
There's really grammatically um, Russian and grammatically Russian's Indo-European language, but uh, it's uh, it's still maintains what we consider archaic forms. So it's learning how to speak it is hard, but translating it isn't. Does that make
Huh.
sense?
That's interesting.
Right. Whereas because there's all these the forms are just I mean you're like what the fuck how do you that's in the what wait a minute there's like so so it's actually a class 4 language. So Chinese on the other hand it's like the language structure is completely different. It's
Yeah.
context heavy instead of word heavy, right? I mean it's a context but instead of a precise language, but you can actually say it actually translates well, like because they don't they have a because Confucianism and whatever it's a frankly it's more primitive, but it's still the concepts are still existent. Does it make sense? The concepts are still existent, but when you deal with Arab languages, Semitic languages, the fucking concepts don't even exist because
Interesting.
it's not a political language, right? It's and
Oh,
you don't realize that it's a tribal language, not a political language, and so you get out into Chinese, which is definitely a political language, and German, which is a military language, and engineering language, and English, which is a legal language, and French, which is a very political language. You sort of Italian is an aesthetic language, right? I mean, so these things all have different sort of bodies of warm and fuzzies to them, but I just have the biggest problem with Arabic because all these legalistic terms that just don't exist.
huh.
And if they, so it's like you get somebody who's quite well educated and they can do it, but I mean, for me to work with the translator, I find it very hard. I have a couple of Egyptian friends on Facebook who
Hmm.
haven't made it over to Twitter, and so I can't rely on them when I used to be able to say because I have one guy who's translated a whole bunch of my stuff in Egyptian, right? He's
Oh,
translated,
no kidding.
and he's an engineer. I mean, I love Egyptian engineers. It's like I just want to hug them because I know if a guy says I'm Egyptian and I'm an engineer, I know I'm going to love them. Right? I don't know what it is, but they're all. It's probably they all come from entrepreneurial families. It's probably something along those lines. But they're always great.
Interesting.
You get the same thing in Persians. You get because you have the Persians who left are they're no different from us, right? The Persians who left Iran after things, and then you have the ones that are there. They're still sort of the middle class, educated.
Mm-hmm.
They're fine, but I mean the nouveau educated classes coming out in these societies, they're getting there, but there's no way to talk about A and B together. You don't have that problem with Turkey. Turks are they hate this, but like, well, you say you're Turkish, but you're Greek and you speak Turkish, and they're like, no, I'm a Turk.
This is like the thing we would do to mess with the South Asians in residency training program. It's like that you identify the Indians as Pakistanis and the Pakis as Indians just to piss them off.
Just to piss them off, yeah.
And it's like it's so exceptionally rude. It's just a line in the sand the Brits drew. Come on now.
It's just playing with each other. It's just stupid stuff.
Oh my. Anyway, I'm going to introduce this episode, but I don't know what number it is right now. 41. My reckoning says it's 23-101-06, but I don't know if you named your staff meeting in there.
In the old term, it would be 41. I don't, and in the new term, I think that's right.
So this will be 07.
07, yeah.
Okay. Now, please, gentlemen and ladies, hit like and subscribe and notification bells and contact the Institute to consider making a donation to help us with our good works here.
Yes, I had a panic the other day because the donation didn't go through from somebody we've been with us forever, and it turned out to be his system. So his bank card company, because when because we're an international thing, right? So I mean, some people are way far away and they put their card in and it's like, that's an American, anyway, weird. So, but everything's working. I'm still getting the occasional
the $3,
actually $5 ones now. I got a $4 because after they take their fee out, it's $4 and some odd cents, right? $4.80 some odd cents or 50 cents. Anyway, so I got another one the other day. I'm like, because I got to reverse every one of them manually. So it's not that many. It's like there were 30 altogether, right? But 30 times
consuming tediosity.
It's $100. It was $114. That's what reversals. But I mean, I just don't want to have all this black marks end up on the Institute because somebody's figured a way to get in. And the only way, now that we've got all the security in place, I have to go through the spam accounts that they created so that until I find the spam account they've put it through on.
Oh my. It's all
I don't know which account they're spamming doing it through until they've actually charged one, and then I can figure it out. But it's just anyway. The problems of we're not special. This happens to fucking everybody, right? I mean, it's not
right.
But it's just not because it's we're a more relationship based business. I view each of these kerfuffles as a trust violation.
Yes.
I don't like it. So I don't want to have that happen. I mean, we're already.
It's a problem.
All right. So what do you got this week? Because you've got ideas. I know you're percolating in the background there. There's some burner going on. And
I'm working on things.
You're working on things. You have
what am I working on?
Political party.
Working on generating a political party. Which is odd because I wrote down the quote that is from H.L. Mencken because it's so significant, which is, I will read it. All all elections are a sort of advanced sale on stolen goods. And I find that to be interesting because it sounds like a warning or like an anti-government trope. And it really turns into an advisory function.
Yes.
Which is like, okay, that was a hard transition to jump through because it's like this is the way government operates. So it is to understand that and then to embrace it instead of to reject it is the trick. And so it is like, so the question becomes then in your political party is not try to have, how to be so totally moral and upstanding, but how to steal stuff and get away with it and get the controls of the machine and then turn it to your best use. That's the game plan. And it's like that, I can do that. So that's what I'm working on. And I'm writing down my demands, which are specific. And I'm trying to figure out how to connect the demands and the political party organizational function to the incentive structure that is to be generated. That's what I'm working on.
So just so the audience knows, you can start, there's basically, you start a party if you want to start a new competing party. You start a political action committee, which is 527 organization, if you want to influence elections. And this all came about because of election reform. An attempt to stop bribing.
That didn't work so well, did it?
Not really. And then there's super PACs. So it's just like this. I don't know this.
It sounds like a political action committee is what I'm after here.
That's what you're after. The problem it is the reason is that we want to address both parties, though.
I want to even go after the libertarians too.
Right. We want to address all parties, but we don't want to form a separate party.
No.
Right.
When I worked for Ron Paul, it was like this. It's like, why would you go and try to make a car in your backyard when you can steal a perfectly good operating one right in front of you?
Well, that was an interesting way to say it. Okay.
We were attempting to hijack the Republican Party for Ron Paul, and we did a pretty good job, but it failed. There you have it. Sorry to interrupt you, Curt.
No, you're not interrupting me.
So a political action committee is what it appears to be the yes, intent.
One of my relatives, who's former representative John Doolittle, he's a Republican in California, got in trouble for producing a leadership PAC. And paid 15% of proceeds to a firm that employed only his wife. Well, it turns out it's like, no, it's not enough. It's like, it's $68,000. I mean, basically he's finding a way to pay for his wife to work. Right. I mean, so it doesn't look right, but it's actually reasonable use of the funds because you're paying your wife a half a salary, right, instead of 3 times that to hire a professional, right, to work for you. So it can end up being smart, but this is the problem with things. They look goofy, and people like to pick them apart.
Yes. Well, they will magnify the alleged offense.
Yeah.
Out of disproportionately, right?
Yeah. So you sort of, the minute you start as an independent think tank, we are not bound by disclosure rules or anything like that, right? And we don't collect enough money to be. I mean, we collect a very small amount of money every year. But once you become involved, they want to know, where the money's coming. You have transparency rules, right? And so that's why they have this stuff here, is so that they can see how everybody's being corrupted. and do nothing about it.
They just want to participate. They want to have knowledge of it so they can leverage it in
Yes.
some fashion, perhaps at a later moment.
Can I be a dork for a minute?
Please do.
Uh,
The audience expects it, sir.
well, it's just, during the whole, I was going through this whole, there's this conspiracy on the left. Yeah, the Russian dossier and all this other crap is bullshit, right? We all knew this. What's weird to me is that it comes out, it's true, and there's like people surprised.
Wait, what's true?
All this corruption that's going on with the Democratic, what do you call it's the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, the Clintons, the FB, the Russian, what is it called, the Russian scam dossier, shit like that. Right? It's all made up, Whereas, I mean, I remember going through the Watergate thing as a kid and thinking, wow, this is pretty serious. Well, that's fucking nothing.
Yes.
It's nothing compared to what to do.
I mean,
I'm still not sure they were justified doing the Watergate thing because of the corruption going on. So Jesus. Anyway, anyway, this is sort of my I don't know how to deal. I don't know how to personally deal with the fact that I'm like, don't obsess about corruption because it's endemic. Fix the underlying problem, right? But then it comes out and they actually investigate all this corruption. It gets laid out, and we learn that it's way worse than we thought. I mean, it's way worse than we thought, and people act like it's a surprise. Well, I mean, it's a surprise to me that it's worse than we thought, but it is a surprise to me that this corruption is going on. I mean, the Democrats have been corrupt since the beginning of the labor movements, at least.
Well, kind of. It comes down to, it appears that it's all about the maintenance of control, and by any means necessary and all means available. And that I'm reading my book here. I'll show the audience. It's the One Nation Under Blackmail book.
Yeah, but it's a violation of the very ethics and morals that the whole country was developed upon, which is that it's an open market competition for truthful discussion and the resolution of differences. And these fuckers are, and the problem is, of course, is the conservatives are in the opposite position. They never should have opened the franchise to everybody. And so the conservatives are trying to preserve the rules against a vast horde of people who want to undermine them. And it's just both sides.
The conservatives tend to be the water boys for the progressives.
They can't win.
The description goes like this. It's like, so the Overton window, the progressives carry the left side of the Overton window to the left, and the conservatives carry the right side of the Overton window to the left. And it's like, you're a participant. You're not thwarting this at all.
Yeah, but it's you're asking people to behave in a way that's counter to the incentives we've systemically created. So I just stop asking people to be virtuous when if they were they demonstrated that virtue, they'd be kicked out on their asses, right? You have to fix the incentives to fix the problem, and so the problem for conservatives is you can only have people who have demonstrated responsibility and competency in the voting pool. And the left's thing is they want to remove responsibility and competency and centralize it in authority because for the benefit of the people who lack responsibility and competency. And so it's the top and bottom against the middle. So we can't fix this by moral castigation. We have to change the
right, because it comes down to pointing your finger and saying that one's bad. He's not doing anything useful.
Well, I mean, but it was one thing when we were in the post-war era and we had this profound economic advantage that lifted everybody up into perceptions that they were winners. But after that dissipated in the 70s, it's all gone downhill. And so we're losing, there's a natural migration to destroy the country and return it and turn it into where Europe is. And the problem is Europe is ahead of us in collapse. Right. And so, I mean, why?
Leading the vanguard, is it? Oh my, still hold a grudge against them.
And the weird part about it is, which exasperates me, is the people who protect the country are not anybody political. It's actually the religious who are against the left because the left is offering competing religion. So
Yes.
it's just weird that our fundamentalists tend to be the vanguard of the right, even though they don't even agree with the right. They're just opposed to the left. You always agree with the right.
I don't know how to process that. So what? What does that mean?
Christians were originally a left-wing group.
Okay.
They became conservative after in response to the Marxist basically in the post-war Jewish expansion of immorality as freedom, especially, and abortion, of course, was there.
Right.
Thing. Because what's Christianity trying to do to you, right? It's trying to get you to suppress your animal impulses in order to develop the agency to invest in the high investment parenting, which is necessary for high investment commons, right? You can't have high investment commons without people who will make high investments in commons. And Christians are the ones who make children who apply the discipline to highly invest in commons. And how do they invest in commons? Through delay of gratification, in order so that instead investment in capitalization. So it's it's like the problem is you can't get. That's why I say, well, I mean, you can't get there from here. We're in this weird position of conservatives actually lose all the time. It's the Christians who win, but they win on the thing that conservatives should be fighting for, but don't understand.
What is that thing?
That you can't, it's not the conservatives are trying to say don't consume, and no one ever will take that message unless they're indoctrinated into it. In other words, you can't voluntarily get people to not consume, just like you can't voluntarily get criminals not to thieve. Well, the left is thievery, right? That's all it is. And then once you get into theft, they're like selling, hey, you can have this shit for free. Well, you can't. It's like I was saying where we're at McDonald and the other guy and Ricardo Duchesne and from Eastern Europe when we had our meeting in New York. I was like, we have nothing to sell because what we're selling is delayed gratification in order to produce commons. But you have to indoctrinate people into that. It isn't natural. Humans are going to seize every opportunity there unless you move it out. So, I mean, we have nothing to sell. Of course we're going to lose.
But this, like this, so the 20th century, the after the war, World War II, the America had the boom related to having the only factories still standing in the world. And we were able to anesthetize the middle class with consumption.
Well, it's actually, they weren't middle class. We rose working and laboring classes into middle class by that. And because what does middle class means? It means two things. You have capital and you can manage it. Well, what it means to the rest of the world is I have well, no, I have surplus that I can spend, or I have surplus production, surplus returns. So the rest of the world sees middle class as disposable income. Well, middle class is actually responsibility for capital that allows you to produce surplus income. So what's happening, of course, is that these people are degenerating back into behaviors that are not producing surplus income, right? and they're not demonstrating. So this is why the black family is dragging the lower class white family back into African family structures, which is the worst family structure there is. I'm going to, whenever I talk about this, because I have to model it in my head whenever I talk about it, and I just want to go jump out a fucking window. The left does not, do they realize how fucking evil they are? And they're just evil.
No, sir. It's unfathomable to them. Then they will. Here's what will be said. It's like this: as you, what will be the conservative will predict what will happen, and then the liberal, when the thing comes to pass, they'll say, "Who could have thought that?"
Yeah. So true. It hurts.
Inevitable. It's like, dude, I told you that. I can't believe that we're having this conversation.
Over time, conservatives will be right. In time, progressives will win. So that's why you have to have these rules in place that prevent them from destroying a civilization from within. So, I mean, how do you want to handle this? You handle it through indoctrination. That's what religions did.
Yeah.
You can handle it through teaching. Well, people make an informed response. You can handle it through legislation and law, which will limit the behavior. Do all three. You can indoctrinate people so that they do it naturally. You can educate people so you understand why. And you can put the laws in place in order to maintain both the indoctrination and the education and the behavior. But I mean, if you don't do any of those things, what you're going to get is return to primitive behavior, which is
it's very interesting.
The total absence of delayed gratification. Hold on.
Sorry.
I'll finish my arc with one more point. Is that the people do what their brains predict? Does that make sense? Of course, that would happen. If your brains predict emotions, you will do what your brains predict. You'll produce emotions. Emotions are short term. They favor hyperconsumption of the moment. If you your brains predict systems, which is things over time, you will see the world as predicting systems. Well, what's the equilibrium between the two? It's whatever trade is possible between the limits as produced by the systematizers and the consumption desired by the empathizers. Well, I mean, realistically, how do you regulate that at scale? You can only do it through marriage, right? That's the way you do it. Is you say, if you want to have these things, and we need population, you have to be responsible for maintaining the ratio between your production, your consumption, and your generation of offspring to continue the polity to the next generation. Well, what do we do without marriage? Well, we've got to start saying, if you don't have kids, we tax the shit out of you and give it to people who do have kids, right? But that's great. Now, who's having kids? Well, now we have to determine what people's kids are worth having. Now, that's a really interesting.
Wow, turning that into a political football.
This turns into a fucking nightmare. So their answer is marriage is the optimum political organization. You could actually argue we don't even have to live together anymore.
Okay.
You just have to maintain a hierarchy of economies so that nobody diverges too far through irresponsibility and anonymity.
That's a funny thing to say. Marriage is the optimum political organization.
Well, it is. It's the tribe. It's the minimum tribe, right? Which is
the necessary minimum polity.
The minimum polity. So you build a tribe, you build a clan, you build.
So it's the minimum quantum polity.
Right. Why? Because all the incentives and all the information exists for you to manage the capital that you're producing and expending. I mean, it's just that's why it's one of the reasons marriages are necessary for advanced societies, is because you can't play these games anymore of privatizing gains and socializing losses too much once everybody's in the same boat. I mean, a family is essentially the great equalizer. Right? It essentially is the first step to producing not equality or equity, but egalitarianism, which is relative indifference.
Now
People hold on. This is beautiful because the fact that I'm saying this and it sounds novel, it's just weird to me, right? You have because what we've done together is so here's what cooperation looks like, here's what family looks like, here's what business looks like, here's what industry looks like, here's what polity looks like, here's what nation looks like, here's what state looks like, here's what federation looks like, here's what empire looks like, here's what civilization looks like. We're just describing the methods by which people perform continuous recursive economic calculation that doesn't diverge from the equilibrium of physical reality, right? That's all it does. Whereas any other circumstance other than what we talk about lacks the information necessary for the individual to make a decision that maintains the equilibrium state between the people, the body of population, and physical reality. And that's why we're in trouble right now. Is I don't know what economist was making a big. It's probably Keen. He's big on this. Steve Keen. He's big on this. Probably him. But he's always on this of he goes a little woo woo, but because he's trying to it's a tendency that people do woo woo is a tendency to try to generate empathy and moral excitement in you or something rather than just stating the facts. But anyway,
right.
The problem is, we're in a difficulty that right now, what people call climate and all this other shit, because the eugenics movement failed. We don't have any problem other than the population and recording to its consumption, when the standard of living is just a measure of energy transformation. So anyway, this whole hierarchy, it's just it's like saying it's why communism doesn't work and markets do. It's because we're so big a population and there's so much information. It's the only way you have the information, the pricing system is the only way you have information necessary to know how to manage scarcity along with everybody else. It doesn't matter when there's a million of us on the planet, but it matters when there's billions, and we're burning more calories than the sun can produce. Sorry, did I go on a much of a rant?
Oh, that was a rough one. That's rough. The failure of the eugenicists as the cause of the problem that we're facing.
And of course,
it's related. There's certainly there's a relationship there that's not undisputable.
No, it's just there's no other. It's just physics. We don't have a choice in the matter. You can't save your way into bigger population at lower energy transformation, because energy transformation in the end is the measure of your. So
right.
It's just annoying that there's all these magical telling and lies. Was just the problem is. I said this yesterday. I know it's offensive, but Darwin and Malthus and Rushton and Nietzsche and Menger and these guys were all right. They were absolutely right, right? And what happened was, of course, we had the First and Second World War, and the progressives, the Nazis, and the Jews, and the Marxists turned together. And they inverted the whole thing into a mirror of continuous destruction on the same scale as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, with Islam being the worst, and it looks like woke is the worst equivalent, right? So, we can't afford another dark age with this many fucking people, unless you want all but 500 million of them to die. So let's fix. So I just that's what I said. So this is the problem. I said is that the everybody's talking about what's the great filter that prevents civilizations from existing. We just went through it. It's the failure to regulate your population ratio and to the what's possible for the planet to produce the surpluses necessary for the next generation of energy consumption. It's just math. And nobody wants to hear that because, of course, all of a sudden now we've got a real problem, right, of under democracy. And it's just a fucking nightmare. We just made a nightmare, unfixable nightmare. I don't like the freaking answer. It's just the answer.
I hope I don't have bad dreams now. Helen did this. So I was what struck me when you were talking earlier about the information that the individual are informed by three methods: the indoctrination, the education, and the legislation. And what interested me about that was
I missed one. The indoctrination, the education, the participation in the legislation. In other words, I forgot to talk about the life as a being within the population. Go ahead. So what you were saying?
So it goes like this. It's like that breaks into past, present, future. The three elements of it: the before, during, and after. The law is the after.
It's actually
it guarantees the after.
Yeah, it's an epistemological cycle. Before you can understand, when you can understand your practice and your limits. Before you can understand, now there's imitation. When you can understand reason, experience or practice, which is doing it, and limits, which is you're calling after, which is the limits, which is the law. And this provides the four necessary steps in epistemic cycle.
Interesting.
And
I'm going to write it down.
Produces a continuous recursive adaptive exchange, right? Because there's always new inventions of lying, cheating, and whatever. There's always new inventions of productivity or innovation, and so there'll always be innovations in the application of the law that produces limits, and therefore there'll always be adaptations to indoctrination, education, participation in the law.
That was nice.
Getting my faculties back, I can feel it coming back. Even it's just so much easier to go through these things now than it was even 3 or 4 months ago. Thank you, Dr. Brad, for helping me, by the way.
As much as possible. So the issue is this. That's why I'm working on this. So, like I said, I'm interested in making a magazine because it's like our blog, essentially, to provide educational processing for interested people to show them what we're doing and encourage participation for the reformation of a law, since we can't indoctrinate them a priori.
We can once we have we end this war against our civilization, right?
Yes.
We can do that quite easily because it's nothing Christianity.
No, but I'm talking about before our current cycle. We're in this epistemological cycle that ends, and then the next generation we can have in place the indoctrination.
Sure.
That's what I'm talking about.
Indoctrination sounds like a bad word. It means training. Right? I mean, it just means you don't have to understand it. You just imitate it. Right? Whereas education means you have to understand it. Participation means you have to apply it. And the law is just to be a negativa limits. It doesn't tell you what to do. It just says what limits you can't do. Anything you can do within
that's interesting.
So you have this continuous years of innovation across the spectrum, and all we're doing is eliminating the irreciprocities from it, falsehoods and irreciprocities from it, leaving the maximum field of potential action for people to take. Now, some people need leadership, and some people supply leadership, and some people are innovators and go on their own way. It doesn't really matter. So the problem we've had in the past is everybody is monotheism created the artificial belief that we all need to run by the same rules, which is true if you're peasants or like the Middle East or you're a permanent underclass. majority. But if you're not, you're in you're in a, frankly, in a higher median IQ civilization, the West or the East. What you can do is instead, how do I just say this? Um, you produce multiple economies, and so the way our ancients did it is they did slavery until you were ready for serfdom, which is until you were ready for freeman, until you were ready for citizen, until you were ready for sovereign, right? And it's just a ranking system, just like you have in the military. Well, you produce different economies for those groups of people, and you allow movement through it. Unlike India, who didn't allow movement through it,
Right.
you allow movement through it. And so you produce those, or like China, which basically prohibited change for all that matter. So you go into this world here, we have migration up and down between degrees of responsibility, just as military soldiers have the ability to attain different ranks. And then what we have today is we have this idea that we have to have the economy be all the same. That's a sort of mistake that's one of those things. What's Enriquez call it? The Enlightenment gap.
The gap of the, yeah.
It's one of those Enlightenment gaps that was mistaken and amplified by the Marxists. In other words, the Enlightenment gap came about. The French made it worse. The Marxists made it even worse. And today we're prisoners of the fact that you need different economies. You need people who are told what to do, right? You need people who are told what work they have to do. You have people who can do that themselves. You have people that can govern all that, and there are people who can decide on how to allocate resources to the people who govern, to the people who are capable of managing things, to the people who need direction for the work they do, at least, and people who need direction in everything they do. I mean, it's just childhood to adulthood. You need different economies, and we have one economy. And so we take people, which is the aristocratic economy and the middle class economy, we take people totally unfit for them, throw in the goddamn meat grinder without an education, without training, without apprenticeship, and they wonder why they're fucking unhappy, and we think they're ungrateful. How stupid can we be? Where does it come from? It comes from oneness, which comes from Christianity. Arianism doesn't think like that. It thinks in ranks. That was part of the Abrahamic method, which is we're all equal peasants under God or authority, right? Whereas what we really want is we need to have different economies. People are such fucking turd flicking.
I gotta get you a thing. I gotta get you a piece of plexiglass or something, and you can draw that you're still on the ark, so that I know not to interrupt you. Because I'm like, when is this gonna end, man? I don't know if he knows it's gonna end. It's gotta end. It's gotta be an end to the other side of the rainbow.
It ends unless I
go here, man.
Well, it ends unless I get lost in the thing you do. And I mean,
I try to shut up. I try to shut up.
I get lost once in a while. Like I was listening to Curtis.
That was a rant. That was a tear, buddy. And it goes like this. So let's talk about this enlightenment gap. Wait, hang on. That's interesting. Okay. So enlightenment gap was the opportunity for the opportunists who think in dualistic terminology. The wise guys figured out how to manipulate the appearance of democracy.
Yes.
With telling the serfs to do what benefits me.
Yes.
For the purpose of empire. And that's what has occurred. And it's like, here it is. The Hebrew word for gap sounds like this. Fair. I knew that would bring a smile to your face, although it did not bring a chuckle. Now you go. So we are to close the enlightenment gap and eliminate the irreciprocity that is necessary for the maintenance of this structure that has been created in its place.
Right. In other words, people need a criteria for success regardless. They need criteria for, institutions for, and a value system for success at their level of competency. They don't need to be imprisoned in whatever that level of competency is, right? If they can achieve more competency, we want them to. This is what Ricardo Duchesne calls aristocratic egalitarianism. It means there's always open room at the top for more. I just think of it as adulting.
Yes.
Where most civilizations are infantilizing. Think about that. Think about how horrible that is. Most civilizations are infantilizing.
Yes, that is.
Aristocratic egalitarianism is adulting. To some degree, China tried. The problem is they fell into Chinese version of credentialism was even worse than ours is, right? I mean, and so it had longer to be bad and to get worse. But the reason China delayed isn't so much their failure to identify the solution to the problem of politics or their solution to identify and adapt natural law, common law. It's more in the fact that the bureaucracy that they determined stopped being aristocratic and martial and became basically middle class or upper middle class and credentialed. And their credentials, of course, devolved to the canonical example of they could draw pretty Chinese characters and speak poetry. So it just turned into a shitstorm. Well, we're the same. We're undergoing the same basics.
This is my experience at my liberal arts college, sir. So please tread lightly.
Sorry.
It's okay. Curt, I'm out of coffee.
I'm out of coffee. You want to pause?
I do.
Okay, I'm going to pause. We'll come back.
All right.
Sorry, I'm making Brad. We're back.
Oh, he decomposed me right before he started recording.
I'm just trying to mess with Brad. So, Brad, what was the question you asked? What's the difference?
I said the difference between computing and calculation.
Right. So you know what reasoning is, right?
Right.
That's a very loose term, right? It's just like what if that and then that and the other, right? Now, there's calculating. Now, calculating is a transformation of inputs into outputs. Well, if I go out and I get the gasoline in my car, I get some flowers, I get some chocolates. It's 7 o'clock. I can be there to pick her up for a date. Now, if I take those three things, we go to this place and I get alcohol. That'll cost, okay, altogether, great. And then I get my chance of getting laid is somewhere above 50%. That's calculating.
Right.
So what that which is not all that is reasonable is reducible to calculable. Not all that calculable is reducible to computable. In other words, a computer can do something. In other words, it's a set of instructions repeated over and over again.
Right. The AI will tell you should buy a bigger box of chocolates. You have enough resources and it will increase your auto scoring.
Right. So technically, I love that I get laughs every time I use an example, but it makes it stick. So we know what auto associating is, right? And then there's not all auto associating is reducible to daydreaming. Not all daydreaming is reducible to imagining. Not all imagining is reducible to reasoning. Not all reasoning is reducible to calculating. And not all calculating is reducible to computing. That's right.
All. So it's the most abstract reduction.
Abstract. Technically, it's the most precise. It had, in other words, the dimensions of inclusion. It's basically how many dimensions are testable, right? How many? So if you're just auto associated, there's no, what the
All
fuck?
right, right,
There's
right.
no.
Okay. So
So
most inflated, most
you
inflated.
have a lot of dimensions there, and
No limits. There's
So by the
limits are
time you
not.
get to calculating, you've got the dimensions are only what are pre-declared, what's repeatable, whatever. So it's actually a pyramid of how many dimensions have you laundered from this so that the probabilities become deterministic, which means calculable, computable. Now, by
Gotcha.
the time you're calculating, they're probabilistic. By the time you're computing, they're deterministic. Does that make sense?
Okay. Computable is deterministic.
Calculable is probabilistic. Um,
Yep.
Reasonable is attempt to make it possible. I don't know how to go back from reasonable to imaginable to auto-associable. I don't know how to. I haven't thought about how to do that.
That's it. It goes into some fuzzy netherworld of fog so
Well, I mean,
fast.
there are terms for this. I just can't pull them off the top of my head because
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
haven't
Mm-hmm.
thought about it in a long enough time. But I mean, a lot of things are associable, especially if you have a drug induced assistance.
Right. That's it.
Or you have mental illness induced assistance. Uh,
Oh my, no, I was talking to the one of my patients is a counselor. She's a nice lady, and she said she really likes talking to the schizophrenics because they're like they have too much strong
yes,
associative functions, and it's like I said I enjoy it too, and because they don't get to talk to anybody because everybody's freaked out by them,
yes,
right?
but
So
you
it's like
actually listen is kind of interesting.
they're interesting people, and they're it's just like how do you manage the fact that you hear all these crazy voices that are telling you to do all kinds of just goofy shit, and it's like, well, they all of them have their own coping patterns, right? And it's
Yeah,
like it's interesting to talk to them about their coping patterns because it's like they're interesting people and they have some significant challenges in the world because compelling voices is problematic.
yes, especially when you're not sure if the person's standing there or not.
Right behind you, like,
Yeah.
well,
Well, I mean, no, sometimes I see them, right?
oh
Person
my.
standing right there is like, I'm not really sure if you're there or not. I mean, I can't imagine living like that. That would be a horror. I have a friend who hears radio. She hears radio stations, right? It's like talking in a radio station that's very quiet in the distance, and she hears that. But she can get full blown as well. But normal, nice, sweet person, right? Kids, the whole thing. But
Mm.
she's in a constant battle. That's fine. I can vaguely associate because my OCD pattern recognition thing is a little bit of a monster, right? So I can understand that you live with this thing. You've got to feed.
Yeah.
I just the difference is I can give mine something to worry about and and leave me alone for a week. You know?
Oh, yeah.
Let's have
It
to
is
have
like anyway. I was chatting with my son last night because we had dinner and they we were talking about families and it's like the dealing with the general public and their various disturbances that they manifest as behavior. And
Mhm.
it's like how it's like, look, there's only one right way to make a family, and there's lots of ways to make dysfunctional families, and they're all over the map.
Mhm.
Because we were talking about the waitress, because the waitress has to engage with everybody, and it's like, and the patterns of among the population is frightening. In fact,
Yes, yes.
sorry, that's a diversion.
We were we were on. So what was I teasing you about? Oh, calculation. All right. So we got that disambiguated, right?
Very nicely.
Very nicely. Um. So see, why do you have to make that disambiguation? Well, because we do. Okay, learn.
That was indoctrination from Curt, by the way. There's no way to avoid it. It's necessary. And it was necessary for me to ask because it's like, it's kind of like this kind of, it's so pivotal and we use the terms frequently. So it's like, that's why I asked.
Well, the word computer comes from people who did computations before we had computers. They would just sit there and calculate rows of numbers, right? Right.
Computer is a title of a person.
An occupation, right?
Yes.
And so computers, the machines, took over that job.
Right.
So that's where it comes from. But those things that are computable, they're following a program, a set of instructions that's repeated. In theory, you don't need any context for a computation. You need a context for a calculation. Where the human supplies the context.
That's it.
Now we got to no. Here's I'm going to throw a curveball in here.
Ready? All right.
Ready? When we call people bots, what are they doing? They're not computing.
No.
And well, not calculating.
They're not even necessarily reasonable.
They're not even reasonable.
They're auto-associating.
They're auto-associating. Does that fuck with your head? When you think about that, now you're like, oh, I get it.
Curt, I'm hanging out in Curt's world with him. And I drink some coffee. And it's like, oh, it's just like being in Middle Earth or something. Like, so it's like, see, robot sounds like it's going to be a computer or something. It's not, because it's just an auto-associative device. It's like my horse, right? It's like your horse, and the horse is like, Jesus, that's scary. What? It was a plastic bag. What are you getting all on about? It's just funny, man.
It's like, and you're sitting there, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to be aware of the horse like he's aware of you, and people don't think that, right? They're not thinking about it in those terms because he's got to trust you, right? Just like you got to trust him. So the problem is you have to, when he does something like, and you're like, the ears, right? It's always the fucking ears. If you know what the horse's ears are doing, you know what they're thinking about, right? So the ears go over there and you're like, oh, he sees this fucking, because their eyesight isn't that good, right? So he sees a fucking little piece of paper,
waving in the wind, right?
And he's like having a nervous breakdown over it, right? And you calm them down and say, I don't know how they figure out when you tell them it's okay, but
right.
Sometimes what Amanda would do is take the fucking horse over there and show it to him.
Yes.
Right. And they're like, oh, yes. Okay, this is not a problem. I suppose that's the best way of.
That's the right answer.
Right answer.
That's what the judge does. The judge is like, so the horse is getting irritable because there's a plastic bag rolling in the wind, right?
You see some of these trainers now. The trainers teach with a fucking plastic bag on the end of a stick. One of these
That's what we were doing. We did it for about 2 hours the other day, and it's like
it makes them fucking numb.
Oh yeah, they don't care. It's like, well, the story was this. It was this is an awful story. There was a rodeo type event where a lady borrowed a horse from another family, and she was to carry the flag, and the flag spooked the horse, and she dropped the flag, but the flag was caught in the flag holder, and the horse dragged the flag behind it as it ran away, and it crashed into a fence and killed her, and it ruined both families since that time, according to the judge. And I'm like, so he's like, so we're desensitizing the horses. He's got this plastic bag on a stick, and we're waving it in there, put it on their head, and drag it up their legs and stuff. And then he had another one, which is a big, like a plastic tarp, black plastic tarp, and we would just drape it on them and throw it over them, and then we laid it out there to get them to cross it. And that was funny because the horse that had just had the plastic tarp on his back, put it on the ground, and he did not like that thing at all, man. And he didn't even want to touch it. It was funny to watch him dance over it. It's like, good Lord, what a big creature doing this little toe thing.
Have you seen the thing where they put a line down in front of a chicken, or they put
Yes.
tape on the floor around a cat?
Wait,
Right?
we're going to end up talking about humans in about a minute.
We're the same.
So this is the sorcerer. They indoctrinate the kids to respond to the symbol so that the chicken is hypnotized by the line, right? They just look at it and can't stop looking at it. And then it's the same thing with the bots. Because you say something like Russia and they go crazy.
So again, can I riff off this because
Please.
I want to reinforce this. The mind predicts what it can predict.
Okay.
Right. Excuse me. That's correct. The brain predicts.
Yes. Thank you.
Predict. The mind can either react to that prediction or it can steer the prediction. You can be the victim of your prediction engine, or you can develop agency over it. And so if the mind is biased to empathic prediction, you can steer it to consequential predictions. But you unfortunately, some people need a lot of fucking training in prediction. So it turns out it's somewhat easier to train the empathic mind to think a little longer term than it is to teach the systemic mind to think a little more empathically. But you can make it work, right? You can make it work. So the problem here is that we aren't teaching what I would call fundamentals: fitness, mindfulness. Fitness, mindfulness, which is knowing, which is not being victim of your impulses and emotions. Basically, not being emotionally activated by them without your will. Others, and the third is we're not teaching people a difference in predictions. So this is why I say that IQ tests are getting worse, because they're doing less job of prediction, where it's the differences in our predictive capacity that produce all the divergences in behavior. And what they're trying to do is make these things converge. What they're doing with that conversion is making things testable, but they're not making predictable. And so predictions are harder to test, but they're more important. So
that was really important. I want you to repeat it because it's for the audience. It's like that, and for me too. And that's because that's a very valuable insight.
So here's the way I usually reduce it is sex differences do not manifest in much in task performance, other than female tendency to do something for approval and the male tendency of not to do something for approval, right? And the female tendency to work in words and pictures, and the male tendency to work in operations and consequences, right? These things are task performance differences that are about the same, right? So men and women don't perform differently doing mundane shit in the workforce precisely because it's mundane shit. However, the minute you start acting people to predict future outcomes, rather than to rely on prediction, then we begin to diverge. I diverge because the outcomes are now more open to bias than task-based performance is. Like put the X in the X-shaped hole, put the block in the block-shaped hole.
Right.
Those are trivialities, right? But the one you got to get predicted, you come out with women predict in emotions, pictures, and words, and men predict in objects, processes, and time, right? And so you see this, or systems and time. So you have spatial modeling and emotional modeling, basically. So it's that difference where things begin to diverge. And so the problem with IQ tests is we keep trying to make them similar, but we're actually, when we make them, in other words, we're trying to narrow the difference between the sexes, versus uniform standard, except that actually launders all the information that's valuable for the individual.
It's funny because it's like let's eliminate the information from the system. Because it's like, what are you paying attention to is what it matters.
Right. When what you of course want is you want to see the root pieces, right? And you'll see that pretty much in vocabulary versus you'll see that in pattern, basically pattern. The word's escaping me now. Patterns,
Recognition,
pattern recognitions. Then you see it in vocabulary, and then you see it in concepts, and then you see it in applied concepts and whatever. But that's a great test. But it's like personality tests are a big five, which eliminate the sixth one, which is the most important, which is whether you have a masculine sympathizing, masculine systematizing, or female empathizing, which is which changes everything about ocean, right? OCE, the very different sex bias. And so we want to know if you're more empathic male or more systematizing female, right? We want to know those things because that tells us something about you rather than the group. In other words, it actually makes the test useful, right? Whereas, it's absent from. It's not absent from Myers-Briggs, which is quite primitive, but it's not absent from it. It's absent from ocean Big Five testing, which is the problem. It's absent from our tests, even though they can tell sex difference performance in these tests. They try to narrow it rather than explore it.
Call that whitewashing, I think.
Well, it was a well-intentioned foolishness, but you've seen IQ tests get easier. Which is some of the problem. It's easier to see the reduction of mathematics.
Yes.
In other words, the swap to make men and women more equal has actually performed to the disadvantage of men and to the advantage of women. So, right, of course. So, and the second thing is that verbalism, which favors women, will end up manifesting as credentialism instead of science and mechanics and engineering and whatever. So you see where I'm going with this is that originally sensible ideas end up to have catastrophic consequences for societies over time in large numbers. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is among men and women, you're in these particular things, right? So we should, why? Because women will go through a female career path fucking anyway, and a man will go through a male career path anyway, unless they have opposing female have more systematizing or males have more empathizing, at which point they'll reverse. And you have female engineers who turn out to be pretty damn good, and they have male therapists who turn out to be pretty good, or the psychiatrists who turn out to be good. Duh, it's fucking obvious, right? I mean, but we're laundering the information necessary to give people positive feedback for the career choices they might make. So you understand? It's exasperating, and it's all to produce the myth. Remember, I keep bringing this up. The myth of universalism, right? That we have to be all judged by the same criteria, living by the same codes, in the same status signals, in the same economy. It's this oneness equality shit, which is the worst fucking nightmare that's happened to mankind, because it's absolutely the worst thing you can judge for. What you want to do is you want to produce a distribution of hierarchies, especially a trifunctional hierarchy, that people can move up or down in as suits their wants, needs, ambitions, and abilities, right? I mean, that's what you want, is the maximum success of every individual. What do? We build a polity that's maximized for the benefit of the upper middle class, and we tell a bunch of people in the middle class and lower middle class that they're actually going to succeed in it, and they actually don't. And then we tell the working and middle class that you're just fucking failures. We throw you out on your own to this market, and you suffer, and you burn your bodies out in it. It's fucking. I just view modernity as evil, not because the Marxists are right. It's because they're actually wrong.
The Marxists are useful idiots for the people who own the shop.
Yeah, well, okay, fine. I mean, they
They
just
are, they are, and it's like it's recognizable that they're cynical because they're cashing in. They're just their corruption is evident.
you need 3 levels of privates. You need a couple levels of corporals. You need a couple levels of sergeants. And frankly, sergeants run the world, right? The rest of us are figuring out logistics, right? Really, that's it. You just need those guys, right? And they have to know that they're successful in their rank. And
Right.
they have to know that the criteria for that rank is your willingness to bear this responsibility successfully. Even like, I mean, even if you want to, you have to be able to, right? So this is why I say I'm such an admirer of Hindu civilization, because they took this to the ultimate madness example that I can't figure out if it's insane or genius, right? I
Yes.
mean,
Now there's a book series by an educator, and I can't think of his name right off the John Taylor Gatto.
Gatto, he's brilliant.
Oh yeah, and his contention was that the British Empire noticed the Indians, and it's like, how did they do this? This is so stable. And then they imported the educational processing from India for the purpose of cementing this caste structure in the English Empire so that things are well done. The foundation is laid well so that we can't be deposed.
Well, I mean, but the truth is, people stay in the aristocracy because they deserve to, because it's very hard to stay there, more than 3 generations. I mean, there's plenty of people who went into and went out of the aristocracy and nobility.
Yes. Yes.
That happens all the time. So that's fine. The problem is you have to have access to it. The way you stay in it is the way the Indians did it. You prevent downbreeding. Whereas you have to mate within your caste. The problem in the West is our caste was too small compared to India's big population. So, and the second problem we had, which they didn't, is they put our second sons, etc., in the church, and they didn't have them reproduce, which was the worst possible solution. I know why they did it, but it was still the worst possible solution. When you look at how the Jews made use of it, of upbreeding, now they pay their freaking rabbis to have kids, right? Because well, that makes a lot of goddamn sense. They should be paying our aristocracy to have kids, right? Well, we were, and then we reversed it. All right, so we were going somewhere. India, caste.
Right.
Okay, the point was that it's when you say you must be in this role, that's bad. When you say you can be, and in your role you can perform at, that's just like the market. The difference is that you have to provide greater security at the bottom of the market than at the top.
Yes.
Right. I mean, if you're at the bottom, you want to have you might want to have your choice of jobs, right? Kinds of jobs you want. But I mean, unions don't do that. Like, you're a fucking electrician and you're this stage electrician. I need you on this job. Tough shit if you don't like it. Right? That's a serf economy.
Yeah, those guys are all right, man. I'm not running into these union guys, and it's like it's interesting to talk to them because it's like, okay, you got to earn your way to get to the rank to have all these journeymen doing what they're supposed to do, and it's interesting to talk to them because they're the sergeants. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No. And so the problem was they tried to get power for the unions instead of just letting them be. In other words, they tried to turn. That was the problem. Where if they hadn't tried to build a communist utopia, instead unions had done that job, it would have been beautiful. So in a sense, the government will turn the unions into a war against the state, and the economy, which is what caused people in my generations and the one before to send all the labor overseas. But if they had just left, if the unions, well, we don't control that. If people want to work for a union and union labor, and we're happy to
So
see,
depoliticize it is what you're saying.
right. You need to depoliticize the fact and keep it an economic choice, right? Because honestly, I tease them all the time because I built a couple of hundred shops in malls, right? And you don't want to build with union because they don't fucking work. I mean, a union shop would take, like we could build a store with private guys in 12 weeks. It would last.
That's because they're not getting paid by the hour.
Well, they get paid by the hour, but you can be fired, right? The problem with union guys, you can't fire them or the union that, in other words, they're requiring you to use them. So the problem is you need to have the union structure, but competing organizations. All right. So you have to have, because I mean, essentially, the building code system produces the equivalent of a hierarchy, right? But there's nobody supplying the work to them and keeping everyone busy.
Right.
So my point is really quite simple, and it's that some people need to be soldiers. You're working on this today, digging holes. Some people need to be in unions, right? You're going here to work on this project for the next 6 weeks. And some people need to be able to said, well, I can find my own work. And some people can say, I can find work for other people to do. And people say, I can find opportunities to invest in so that you can hire the people to find work to do, right? I mean, it's just, and realistically, this ends up being, you have union things for very complex stuff that's can't afford to be costly. And you have smaller companies, depending to do things. But the great thing about the union structure is now you've got ranks. And so you can push those ranks out into the private sector, right? So all that's changing here is who's responsible for getting you work, right? That's all. Are you responsible, or is the system responsible? So I mean, the court should get paid more the more you're independently responsible. But if you want to know how the Soviets build all their shit, that's why, is they didn't have to pay market wages for labor. And instead of putting wages into labor, they put it into the production of commons. Of course, they ran out of that because eventually you run out of incentives, right? And corruption.
Wait, the story goes like this: is they pretend to pay, we pretend to work.
Yeah, well, it's one thing though, but I mean, I know people that worked at Chernobyl, right?
That's right.
And they're like, I mean, you're talking about people who were peasant farmers before that, right? And they had good jobs. They had a nice apartment,
yep.
Right? You're right. They had they had enough food, right? They had, and the people I know, they still have the apartment. They're old now, but they still have the apartment, right? Mm. You wouldn't want to, I mean, it's Khrushchevka, right? It's some of those, concrete things, which I think are adorable myself, but I'm weird. So they live in those little things. And, he's had a heart attack and he's this big around and he drinks and he smokes. And she's this big around, whatever. But, they don't look at that time period as awful. They look at it as, it was the farm. It's hard to make it on the farm.
Yeah.
Right. So,
it's an improvement.
But I mean, that's how. So what China did is they're like, well, we can't do that because the whole monetary incentive thing works better than the slave labor thing, right? Which is what the serf labor, which is how the Russians did it. And the second thing is we can handle corruption our way, but we can't handle that level of corruption, right? So the Chinese knew what they were doing. They were just choosing the route between the Russians and us, right?
Yeah.
In the middle
Right.
ground places. All right, I'm getting off track here.
So that arc that you drew there about the hierarchy and the security at the bottom and who is responsible for getting you the work was interesting to me because it described an ethical system. And all the while, I'm looking at the corruption that is evident in the system that we're now enjoying the fruits of, and it is like I'm like, because what happened was in the 20th century, the enemies of Western civilization deliberately took control of the banking system for the purpose of corrupting it.
Mm-hmm. They knew what they're doing. Whereas, for example, let's tie two things together. Let's try the labor market and the financial system together in the way you just described. Two things that apparently you wouldn't think are this related, except for their. Now, why did they tried to get political power because of the unions, which was very corrupt, right? Corrupt as shit, right? You're putting a lot of money in a union organization that fosters corruption the way it fosters corruption in the Soviets or everywhere else that tried it. Okay. So, so what we didn't do is depoliticize the unions, right? Make the prohibit them from all this political activism and crush the corruption. And the second thing is we let labor arbitrage take the work overseas instead. So instead of solving the political problem, right, of the politicization of the unions, we basically destroyed the unions by sending all the work overseas and fucking our people. Now, that's called...
Or wait, that maintains political control. That was not an accident either.
Well, I mean, I was in favor at the time because I thought the unions were we're going to achieve what the Soviets had set out here. So I mean, I was absolutely positively in they'll learn their lesson. They didn't learn their lesson; it just made it worse, right? The unions have gotten better, but we could have legislated the unions into better, right? So we made a foolish set of mistakes because we were ignorant instead of just looking at the basic incentives structured. And now we've got to repatriate all those industries. We've got to restore the populations of the center of the country because you want industry to be distributed, right? Etc. So we've got to reproduce that workforce, right?
Wow, and that's like, yeah. The interesting thing, people don't recognize this probably without some indication of it, which is that you lose skills in the population because the guy dies and he needs to generate a young guy that knows what he knows by training him. Yes. And we haven't been doing that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I want to make a case that we sent jobs and knowledge overseas. We did that because we said, well, that'll produce consumption for the country at lower cost. But who did that benefit? I hope I can tie this all together easily. That benefited the financial sector, who gave credit to people to consume.
Yes.
When what we could have done is do what nobody wants to do, but is absolutely the right idea, is we could have said, if you send your work overseas, we're going to end labor arbitrage by raising the tariffs on import of those goods so that they essentially replace the lost wages. Of course, then nobody's going to move overseas. But what happened, because we didn't do that, is we sent the labor overseas and China became a competitor. But what was our incentive to do it? Well, we got rid of the labor industries too, and we paid the rest of the world through getting our trade, offshoring trade, to stay in line with us, the Soviets. But we didn't end it in 1992 when the Soviets ended. Am I making too complex a story?
No. It's I'm processing it because I'm trying to. My brain is like, how do we undo this mess? Right.
It's easy.
To replace the financial stoppers that were removed.
Now, the worst is we did all this, right? And who's making all the money on monetary expansion is these financial sector people. Why isn't that tax revenue? Why aren't those trillions of dollars tax revenue? Well, because it's all consumption borrowed from the people. It's not borrowed from these companies. These companies are actually insured against losses. So why isn't BlackRock part of the Treasury? We pay you commissions from the Treasury, but the profits stay in the Treasury rather than private sector. Well, I mean, who's insuring it? The state and the people. So we did about everything wrong possible. So, and now, why is that? Because the minute you think, I'm going to terrify you now.
Oh my.
Because the government can be completely irresponsible the way it behaves today. It has no responsibility for revenue generation. But the minute you say, well, I'm gonna help, I want batteries to be generated or whatever, or I want to support fundamental research. And the government owns an interest in the patents that come out of that basic research.
Mm-hmm.
Or when the government invests in a company, the government retains an interest in that company. Or when you give loans to consumers, the government retains it as income. What happens to this financial sector? It has only one choice. It can't find rents anywhere. It can only look at market opportunities that are this. It's not worth the state's interest to pursue. So what would happen is the state will do research and development, strategic development, and credit, whereas the business sector will deal with consumption, innovation, adaptation, and efficiency. And so it's not. So when I say it's not fucking hard at all. I mean, the problem is you're seeing the government today, which looks just like it needs to look like Silicon Valley, which is the primary vehicle for revenue generation for the state, is revenue generation by improving the state of the economy.
Right.
That makes them fucking responsible. They don't want to have the responsibility. They don't want to have anything testable. So what did the monarchies have to do, though? They had to make sure that they were doing all the things right, whereas the democracies don't. They're actually irresponsible. Whereas what happens when they brought in the socialist model of centralized control, you made the governments responsible, and it turned out they were corrupt and incompetent.
And obviously so.
Right.
Unavoidably, detectably so.
The problem is the government can be a financier and an investor, but it's actually a really bad capital manager, which we've learned from China, which is a fascinating lesson. So it's nothing terribly difficult to deal with here. I mean, people are all still people, and the difference that we would put in place is we'd restore the ability to sue the people in the state for corruption, crimes, whatever, and we'd make it profitable to catch them. But we could pull the best investment people into BlackRock's out there doing their game again with Ukraine and Russia. I mean, these people are.
What are they doing?
Financing the war and the reconstruction.
Well, that makes sense. Maybe I should invest.
Well, but you understand that why is that's happening? Because those people don't work for the government. The government isn't making revenue as an investor when the government is the primary investor in everything. In other words, that's where the money's coming from, is through credit expansion. Well, why isn't the state making credit expansion and then instead of the banking system? And the banking system instead is going out there and is acting like investment firms. Because what's happening is capital's all going to extraction, which is only exacerbating the problem. It's looking for rents.
Wait, I tell it to my patients like this. It depends what side of the table you're on if you call it a problem. Right? Because it's a feature. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And it's to be exploited till the end. An opportunity to be exploited. And so they're exploiting it.
Government can be made
until we draw the line. The chicken's going to keep wandering around in the yard.
The government can be made meritocratic again. But it has to be, it has to be, ready for this? It has to be calculable.
I like how you tied that nice little knot. That was beautiful.
Anyway.
How about that? Was that a good arc?
That was a pretty good arc.
I did one in ways I didn't expect it to.
Well, I mean, so when the arcs tease me about my arc, but those arcs are how you weave together all these things that are apparently apart. Whereas if you look at the financial sector problem, you look at the labor problem, you look at the hollowing out of America problem, you realize it's one problem. It's the government. And the government has malincentives, right? And because we haven't arranged incentives correctly. Now, what people want to do, what the dumb shits of the world do, which is 99.9999999% of them, they're asking you to be moral in the face, right? And comprehend what you're doing in the face of counter incentives to do that. Whereas I'm like, people, first of all, aren't that smart. They don't understand the world that well. We probably can't get them to. So you have to engineer incentives so that the incentives produce the moral behavior, regardless of their moral or immoral intent. So, if we set the government up to do stupid shit, the government's going to do stupid shit, and it does. So,
it's like I say, it depends on what side of the table you're on, because it's like it's working for one team.
Well, I mean, the Republicans think they're smart too, and they're just
no. I don't. I regard it as this. It's like it's a systematic function that is criminal in its operation, and it is to the benefit of the criminals.
Oh, I mean,
so the robbers are like this. It's working exactly like I want it to work.
Well, that's why they're so resistant to a Trump, is because he wanted to gut them, and they fought with every bit in them to get him out of office and powerless, so he couldn't do what he was trying to accomplish. And all he needed to understand was that we're getting fucked domestically because he runs.
He understood what was going on.
He understood what was going on, and so he just looked at it as we were being fucked. I mean, he was looking at the country as a business.
Yes,
how we were getting fucked. The problem is that he didn't expect to get elected.
So, this surprised even me.
Well, he just didn't have the staff. He didn't have the people lined up. He had he ran a trivially simple campaign with almost nobody on it. And when he landed up,
so he didn't have enough troops, man.
Didn't have the troops.
Well, it's like shenanigans. It's like I'm watching the show, and it's like the show has become as ridiculous as drawing a line in the sand in front of the chicken. It is the political show coming out of the District of Columbia is like absurd to the point of that Saturday Night Live sketch writers couldn't write it.
Oh, it's pretty clown world, and of course, it's not like. Yeah, I can still remember when we had blue dog Democrats and Republicans, and these people were all trying to get to the same end. It was just a matter of priorities between what classes and factions. But the whole Marxist pomo woke thing has just gotten enough root that the left has, especially the Jewish left, had determined that they can capture the government by immigration within the visible horizon. So they've gotten confident in their victory, so they've gotten out of hand. So we're going to have to fix this problem. I mean, yeah, people talk about this, but I'm like, people can be sent back home. It's not that hard. People can be disenfranchised. It's not that hard. So not that we need to do that. I'm happy. I don't really care. What I care about is it stops and people integrate. But whatever.
Right.
And we got to kill this left.
And the appropriate incentive structures put in place.
All right. So we've been on for almost 2 hours. I'm not wiped out yet. If you want to talk a little bit about Biz, we can close this recording and start another one, or we can call it a day and pick up tomorrow.
Your call.
I think I'd like to run something by you so I can think about it.
So you want us to close the recording and then make a new recording?
Yeah, just even if it's just for a little while.
That'd be fine.
Right? Because I want to talk about what we've got to do to not get back to the book.
Yes.
Because I'm ready to get back there and I want to do that. All right.
Very good.
Thank you, everybody. Please like, subscribe, bell, go to the website, donate, whatever. Thank you for today. It's Saturday, January 14th, 2023.
Leave some comments, please.
I hope this was educational. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Curt.